Good afternoon, everyone. I'm here with our Garland County Audubon Society member and avid birder, Mr. Jerry Butler. And today's program is another episode in a Bird in a Book series. This month's book is Where the Crawdads Sing by Delia Owens, which was a very popular library book here a few years ago when it released. I remember we had over 60 holds on it here at the library at one point. But Mr. Butler is going to talk about that book, the behind the scenes, as well as its connection to birds, and share some testimonies from some local readers of that book. So he's got a great show today. And if you have any questions or comments, if you're watching live, please don't hesitate to share those. And for now, I'm turning it over to
you. People, and Paul, it's good to be here and talk about this book. Now, this is the only novel that we've ever handled on the Book and the Bird series, but it's one that's been so very, very popular. New York Times, it was on the New York Times. It topped the New York Times for 32 weeks in 2019. And we'll just get right into the program. And there's some things we'll be showing you. During the program, if you want to contact Paul, any messages, I will handle those or answer any questions or hear any comments later on. So I look forward to hearing that. Where the Crawdads Sings is a book that's written by Delia Owens. This is not her first book, but it is her first book of fiction. She has written some scientific books, and those scientific books were, of course, for the scientific community. But she has written Where the Crawdads Sings, and it's an interesting story. First in our program today, we're going to take a look at the book itself, and then we're going to watch a video about the author, and you're going to meet the author of Where the Crawdads Sings. And then we're going to hear from some readers, some people here in Garland County who have read and enjoyed the book and want to share their thoughts about it. And after we've heard from the readers, I'll make a few comments because I read and enjoyed the book as well. And then we'll take a look at the bird. And then finally, we'll look at what's next in the Book and the Bird series. Well, this is the book, Where the Crawdads Sings. And pictured on the front of it is a young girl who's in a boat who's sailing out across the marsh. It's a very good cover for this book because that's what the book is about. The book, the novel is set on the Atlantic coast. I thought when I was first reading it, she was in the Carolinas, but she mentions places in Georgia too. So perhaps she was on the borderline of Georgia and Carolina. Of course, it's fiction, so either one would fit. And it's the sort of the life story of a girl, Kaya, who was born in 1945 and died in 2010. And the themes in the book are loneliness and nature, coming of age, murder, and romance. As you read the book, you'll notice that there's some great descriptions of the natural world, and it compares the natural world with the human condition. And the story is told in a series of flashbacks. It doesn't just start chronologically and go from birth to the death. It flashes back and forth and sets up the murder mystery part of the thing very well. And of course, it's been a huge publishing success and widely read, as Paul has already mentioned. The author is Delia Owens, and in 2020, CBS ran this clip. Then we're going to be watching it now, Paul. Okay, while Paul's getting that video clip ready, I might suggest to you that Delia Owens is uh, is a botanist, and she did a lot of her work in botany in Africa. And she, I don't know really where she is from. Now she lives in the Pacific Northwest. And when we meet her on this clip, we'll see that she's not in the delta swamps of Georgia, but in the Northwest.
Week's New York Times bestseller list is out, and once again at number one, Where the Crawdads Sing from author Delia Owens. Just how the novel came to be is a story in itself, as Lee Cowan explains.
It's almost in Canada with a view on the sea. That's just how remote this northern corner of Idaho really is. It's worlds away from almost everything except nature.
So now this is really special. See these little otter prints that they're like.
Oh, yeah. For Delia Owens, it's heaven. Wildlife is her church. Vast isolation, her muse. Do you get lonely out here?
I do. I get so lonely sometimes I feel like I can't breathe. That's lonely.
You like a part of that, though, right?
I do. And I decided to write a book about it.
Please welcome Delia Owens.
That book, Where the Crawdads Sing, has become a phenomenon.
It still haunts me. It was so beautifully written.
At a recent book fair in Savannah, Georgia, she had readers lined up around the block just to meet her.
It's so many stories wrapped up into one. I couldn't put it down.
And you're Katie?
The book has become a fixture on the New York Times bestsellers list over the last 6 months. On the day we visited, Putnam, her publisher, gave her a call.
Congratulations. 3 weeks.
Oh, you got what?
To tell her she'd just made it to #1 for the 3rd week in a row.
Oh, thank you. You guys just are so
I'm so
amazing.
happy for you, Delia.
They keep sending me champagne. One thing about a success is I have learned how to open a bottle of champagne by myself.
Because they keep coming.
They keep coming.
What makes her success all the more remarkable is that Owens, now 70, has never written a novel before.
I have had such a great response from my readers. I just feel overwhelmed with gratitude.
The book is pretty tough to categorize. It's a love story, a murder mystery, a courtroom drama, and an ode to the outdoors, all in one.
Also in here are old copies of the manuscript, which would be hilarious to read. But
It took her the better part of a decade to write, inspiration coming whenever it came.
I sleep at night with a little pad of paper in my bed with a flashlight and a pen. And I'll wake up in the middle of the night and write something down.
Something occurs to you.
Something that I think is brilliant. And then when I wake up in the morning, I'll look at them, and half the time I can't read what I wrote. Now the long awaited, nope, can't read it.
Nope. 1,000 such moments became little scraps of gold.
Sand keeps secrets much better than mud. That one made it to the book. Sand keeps secrets much better than the mud.
See, that's a great line. That line would never occur to me in a million years.
The title, Where the Crawdads Sing, was taken from a phrase her mother used to use, encouraging her tomboy of a daughter to take to the woods around their rural Georgia home and listen to what those woods had to say.
I learned from a book that crawdads don't really sing. But I learned from my mother that if you go far enough into the wilderness by yourself, and there's nothing but you and nature, you will hear the crawdads sing.
She took that advice to heart, earning a BS in zoology and a PhD in animal behavior. And at 24, bought a one-way ticket to Africa to put her science background to work. With her then husband, Mark Owens, they made a name for themselves in the wild. writing 3 books together about their experiences with elephants and lions.
Tooth eruption and wear helped the Owens determine the lion's age.
Even appearing in this National Geographic documentary.
Got company here, son. They're bound to come over here.
We were in one stage the only 2 people in an area the size of Ireland, and we
You
had
never saw anybody.
no, not unless people came to our camp, and that was very, very rare.
The 2 have since divorced, but Owens kept on writing. What she wanted to explore was something she felt all those years in Africa, but couldn't really measure, at least not in a scientific way. And that was her feeling of being alone.
I would watch the lions in the late afternoon with the sun setting behind the dunes, and they'd be playing and tumbling with their cubs and each other's cubs. And it made me think about my girlfriends back home. It made me realize how isolated I was not to have a group. And that was one thing I wanted to write about in my novel, was the effect that isolation and loneliness can have on a person.
The seed for her first novel was planted. She chose as a setting a lonely place indeed, a marsh like the one she took us to, just off the coast of Savannah.
This would be just the kind of channel that she would come through.
Yeah. Her protagonist is a girl named Kaya,
It's not too bad.
the marsh girl, as she's known in town, forced to scratch out a life out here all by herself
But this is just the sort of habitat she would be in.
after her family abandoned her.
Feel like we should see her coming. And yes,
Because
don't
you do
you?
talk about her like she's real.
She is real. She's very real to me.
For Kaya, this was her world, the wild her teacher, both in love and loss. Much the way Owens herself had found her way through life.
I feel at home when I'm in a place like this.
Yeah.
You can put me in the middle of a desert or the middle of mountains. When I'm out away from everything else, I feel like I'm home.
Perhaps that's why writing fits her so. After all, it's a pretty solitary pursuit. But being a successful writer, well, that's anything but.
Is it hard doing a book tour and all that other stuff where you're surrounded by so many people and you've got so many events and book signings and everything?
It's very hard. I don't like that part. And to stand up in front of a crowd and talk.
I've lived a remote life. I'm not used to seeing so many people in one place. And although I'm sure you're very nice, the feeling of excitement that I get right now is sort of the same as being charged by a lioness.
You certainly can't put the genie back in the bottle. She's even sold the rights for an upcoming movie, one Reese Witherspoon is producing. Hollywood, though, is a different animal than she's used to.
Woohoo, boys! Come on, boys! Come on, boys!
Delia Owens remains a nature girl at heart. Happiest way out yonder, just like her mother always said.
Okay, you've earned your dinner. Come on, boys. This is where the crawdads sing, right here. This is it. I finally found it. It took a lifetime. Yep.
Well, I guess you've noticed from that clip what an interesting person she must be and how much fun it would be if we could get her here to talk about her book on Book and a Bird. In fact, I tried to contact her, but she wasn't available on this date. But maybe some future time you'll have an opportunity to meet them. I need to click sharing. Okay. Okay. And so there we have, there we have the clip. And now that you know a little bit about the book, I hope many of you have already read the book. If you haven't read it, let me encourage you to. But we're going to hear from some other readers, and they'll not reveal the exciting conclusion to the book, but they will talk about their reactions to it. And I've tried to ask each one of these persons to focus on a little different aspect of the book, although you may see here some overlapping. The first person we're going to hear is Margot Bushmeyer, and then I'll introduce the others as the video continues. Hello, I'm here with my friend Margot Bushmeyer. We were in a book club together many years ago. Well, not a lot of years ago, but before the pandemic. And we read Where the Crawdads Sing. And I've asked her to come and tell me what she thought about the book. And I was wondering, Margot, we read this book a while back. Has it stuck in your mind? You know, we read a lot. It's stayed with you.
Well, it has, and I noticed that it's still a bestseller. So a lot of people across the country are interested in it and reading it. So it's definitely a topic that a lot of people are interested in. So yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's a love story and a murder mystery and a courtroom drama and a nature story. What aspect of the book appealed most to you, and did you find most enjoyable?
Well, it is a story about a young girl, the heroine, I suppose you call her, that grew up in a very harsh family where her mother left when she was very young. So she had to learn to be independent and rely on herself. Her father did not support her, and he eventually left, and all her brothers and sisters left because there was violence, and he had some PTSD after World War II, I believe. And so it's this heroine, the story is about how she survives in the swamps of North Carolina. So as Jerry said, there's also the nature part of it, which was very interesting, how she develops friendships with birds and seagulls and other critters in her community, because she does not go to school. She has social services looking for her. She does befriend a few humans, and so that's kind of interesting who she does meet and who helps her in her survival. But it is about this young child who, it's at age 6 or 7 when her mother leaves, and then I think her father leaves when she's 10. So she's, has a lot of growing up to do. I told Jerry one of the questions I remember is from our book club, is this believable, and could a child today do this? Did you say something?
Yeah, and I think she was very special. She's very precocious child, very bright.
Obviously intellectual. Yes, without being, I don't know that she ever learned to read, so she was illiterate, but intellectual. Yeah, obviously had a good brain. There's a good gene pool there somewhere.
Yeah. You sort of got the idea that it came from her mom more than her dad.
Well, yes, she did have some good memories of her mother. And so luckily she did spend time with her mother when she was young. So she learned a little bit about cooking, but what do you learn by age 6 or 7? Not much. So I think she learned to make biscuits or something, but, and luckily there was another woman that taught her a few things from a bait shop, where one of her first entrepreneurial efforts was to sell mussels that she found on the shore near where she habitated. Is that the right word? Yes. You can't, her living circumstances were so bleak. But anyway, she did meet this man that used to sell bait and gas, and his wife, and they'd get her some clothes, and she'd trade fish for that. So that was one adult friendship she had that helped. But basically, she was on her own surviving.
Yeah, I thought the notion of the couple who befriended her was a black couple. His name was Jumpin, and her name was Mabel, as I recall.
I think so.
And when she started becoming a woman, why Mabel sort of taught her to care for herself and taught her to what it meant to be a woman.
Yes. But this was in this early 60s in the South, so that was still during segregation.
And that created problems for her, a white woman, to be so closely allied with the black family, who were really her only friends, adult friends.
And supporters.
Mhm.
But she, having been raised by herself, she didn't know she didn't know about prejudice. She didn't have any of those feelings, but the rest of the community did and had problems with that.
I tell you what we're gonna do. I'm gonna get a little interviews like this for 6 or 8 people. And then I'm gonna edit them down. I'm gonna get comments from everybody about this book, but I don't know which segments I'm gonna use. I hear from everybody else. And since this book is about a lot of different things, I don't know what people will be interested in, but I would like for you to talk about some of the natural aspects of it. Talk about her feeding the seagulls, talk about how she survived by the natural foods, talk about those sorts of things. Belinda, who is also in the Audubon Society with me, and she's very interested in all things natural, and she's a member, I think, of the Master Naturalists here in our city. And we're going to be talking about Where the Crawdads Sing. And Belinda, this book has so much in it about nature and about this young girl growing up in the marshes of the Carolinas, along the Atlantic coast. Tell me what you learned about that habitat in this book and what you think about it.
Okay, so I'm kind of familiar with that sort of habitat, and a lot of our stuff does overlap with the flora and fauna that's in that part of the country. I mean, a lot of the Carolina stuff we have also, but of course they're more seashore type things because it's an on the edge of the ocean setting. But I did enjoy the descriptions and the references to lots of familiar critters. She was talking about basically a hunter-gatherer lifestyle that she was forced into, or she just grew up that way because she didn't have many other options. So it had that kind of a like Tarzan and the kid raising itself basically with mostly not people for company. And she was very observant. That was one of the things I liked about it, is some of her observations. And I did mark a couple of places.
Good.
And I liked her description about the great blue heron, but I was doing a little research on fireflies, and she had referenced fireflies several times because but she was talking about there are species of firefly that the females will imitate the flash pattern of a male of a different species, and he'll go, oh, it's a girl, and he'll go down and it won't be his species, and she'll eat him. But she made some comments about this, or what she was thinking when she saw this behavior occurring. females got what they wanted, first a mate, then a meal, just by changing their signals. So she made several natural history references, but I think I actually kept this quote. Kaya knew judgment had no place here. Evil was not in play, just life pulsing on, even at the expense of some of the players. Biology sees right and wrong as the same color in different light. So yeah, we cannot use, quote, our cultural values to put what happens between different species. You know, they're different. You have to accept that. You can learn from them and marvel at the very huge range of things that can happen. Whatever works, hey. And
I saw another instance of that in the book, where right at the very first of the book, she observed that her father was sort of cruel and mean, and she has this sentence where she said, among themselves, doves fight as often as hawks. And that's sort of the same thing. And I observed on my feeder very recently, doves being very aggressive towards one another. And I've never thought about it. But when I read that sentence, I saw that.
so if you have the same species in especially a setting where there's a limited amount of food and there's competition going on for the same sorts of seeds, then yeah, you'll have some squabbling. And another thing that she mentioned that I was gonna kind of look up was the behavior in the turkeys. There was one that a female turkey that had gotten injured and the others pecked it to death. And that was another thing I thought she grew up killing chickens and having them as food. There's a turkey freshly dead. You may think about how she died and the behavior, but you're going to take the turkey home and eat it.
Yeah.
She didn't, which is out of character. But the pecking order behavior among domestic chickens has been, especially when you have them crowded together like that. But her observation was that I think her brother told her, and I'm not sure what studies go along with this, but when you've got a flock together and one of them is injured, being set upon by the others, it would be safer to kill one than have an injured one trigger the predatory behavior of things like hawks, coyotes. So they're essentially removing a potential threat by killing the weak one.
I'm going to sit here next to you.
Okay.
And I'd like to introduce you to my friend John Davis. John and I eat breakfast together every Wednesday, and then we have a book club we're a member of, and he's in the book club. And a while back, we read Crawdad, and John has an interesting take on all the books we read. And so I've asked him to come here and talk a little bit. I'm going to move off camera, John, and you'll be paid. So if you'll just address your comments
Okay.
to that camera, but I may ask you some questions or expand on something you say.
That sounds great.
Okay, go ahead.
Well, because I especially like the main character, Kaya or Kaya, however you want to say it. I mean, I liked her a lot. I mean, impressed me, and as you know, her parents left her, and she made do by herself out in the nature environment. And I don't know. Then when her abusive father, of course, I didn't like him, and he ended up leaving the picture after when she was young. I guess seems like around 6 or so. And then that one time she was forbidden for take. I guess this was before he left. She was forbidden from taking her dad's fishing boat out, but she snuck around and took it anyway one day, and then went out out of the marsh, and she ended up getting lost. And this older boy, Tate, saw her, and he helped her in a kind of an indirect way, but he helped her find her way back home. I guess that was his first appearance in the story. But from the beginning, I was interested in what would happen with Tate. And then, of course, later on, I guess several years later, he ended up being the one who started teaching her how to read. Of course, she tried to go to school, and that lasted one day, if I remember right. And the other kids made fun of her, and she didn't go back. She left the school and didn't go back. She didn't know how to read or write. And then later on, Tate helped her, and I was pretty impressed with that. And
did you think that she was romantically linked to Tate?
Not at first, but I wanted her to be.
Yeah.
But I don't think she was romantically interested. I don't think she was interested in anything romantic for a long time. Until sometime far later in the story. I was a bit disappointed when I believe Tate is the one that he went off to college and told her he would come back, and then he didn't, and I was real disappointed in that. I think the way it went is he was embarrassed or didn't have enough nerve to come back and tell her that he didn't think she'd fit into his world or something like that. But I was wanting them to get together the whole time.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And of course, one of the things that kept them from getting together is that love triangle is the Chase.
Yeah. Chase was chasing her.
Yeah.
And she rejected him more or less. Well, he got real aggressive later in the story with her, and I guess sexually aggressive, and she rejected that. In fact, I think she ran away from him. So, you know, I was glad to see that. I was still wanting Tate to come back around, but apparently Tate did come back from college, and he observed them discreetly or something like that, and determined that she was seeing Chase, or he thought she was. And so he kind of stayed away for a while. But,
you know, it's a murder mystery too, in addition to being a kind of a love story.
Yeah. Chase died. Yeah.
Yeah. Chase was the victim.
Yeah.
I thought he was a victim that needed to be killed. He wasn't a victim that you feel sorry for, like in many murder mysteries.
Right.
And then there's a courtroom where they try to convict her, but there are other people in the book. Who did you think were possible people that could have murdered?
Well, toward further along into the story, we haven't talked about jumping yet, but her friend that he and his wife Mabel ran a little bait shop in town, I guess. And whenever Kai went into town, she befriended jumping. And she told him a lot of about what was going on in her life. And I really suspected that jumping is the one who killed Chase along toward the latter half of the story, but it turned out to be not the case. But that's who I would have put my money on him. But
And then there was at the murder scene, there were no fingerprints and no.
All right. I don't like.
I'm sorry. You look
Oh, funny.
This is my friend Sherry Davis. Sherry is a master gardener here in Garland County, and she's very interested in nature. And when I go to her house, she feeds the birds, and I always like to look at the birds in her backyard, and we talk about what we see and the plants we grow. And so Sherry has read and enjoyed Where the Crawdads Sing too, and she's going to share with us some of her impressions of the book. Okay, Sherry, right here. To start, tell us about the marsh that Kaya grew up in.
Yes. Well, that was one of the elements of the book that struck me as most intriguing. Of course, I've never lived in a marsh, but the descriptions of all the plant life and all the animals and the things that live in the water that you don't know about. The descriptions were really, really vivid. You felt like you were there. I learned a lot from those descriptions, and the fact that this little girl could live and grow up by herself, basically, in these swampy areas was just amazing to me. She, later in her life, became basically a botanist. She learned everything about all the little critters that lived in the swamps, and she wrote books about them. She drew pictures of them, documented them, and she actually became famous publishing books about her home. And she just was an inspiration, I think, to a lot of other people who couldn't believe that she could do all of that without much of an education, without any formal education, but just what her friends were able to teach her over the years.
One of the things about that to me, Sherry, was not only did she describe that, but she made observations. She didn't just record the names of those creatures. She was interested in how they behaved, and what they did and how they related, and how the insects and the shells and the fishes and the plants were all tied together.
Right. And they all, live off of each other in the same ecosystem. So it was just amazing to me how descriptive it was.
Mm-hmm. And then she herself was part of the marsh.
Right. She grew up in it. She knew every inch of it. She, after the first time she got lost in there, she was just a child then, about 5 or 6 years old. But it seemed like that sort of propelled her to start to learn about the marsh and all the little trails, the animal trails. She could follow them down and find out which animals lived where and how they reacted and where they went to get their drink of water. And she was just so immersed in it that she knew everything about any animal or any kind of critter that lived in the marsh.
Yeah. I found myself, even though she was a fictitious person, I found myself wishing to have one of her field guides or one of her books to read and enjoy.
I did the exact same thing. I thought, I wonder if we could find that book somewhere.
Yeah. She seemed to be quite a person. Now, there's another element of the book I want you to ask. Do you think it's believable that a child with no more adult supervision or guidance could go there? Or is it completely unbelievable?
Well, I don't, to me, by the end of the book, it was believable. In the beginning, I was a little skeptical, but then she had these people start taking an interest in her and coming into her life. The guy Tate that helped her learn to read and write and learn and brought her all these books about nature and biology and all of that. And then the older couple in town, Jumpin and Mabel. This was a African-American couple that owned a little shop apparently right on the edge of the marsh, because Kai would take her boat over to see them, and they helped her basically make a living. She would catch fish and mussels and things and bring to them. They in turn would give her food or gas for her boat or things that she needed, and basically took her under their wing. That Mabel even had people from her church donate clothing and things that she could quote sell to Kaya in exchange for her fish and mussels and whatever. But without those people taking an interest in her, then no, there's no way she could have survived all of that and grown up by herself, I don't believe.
Do you think readers who are not interested in plants and birds like you are, would they still enjoy this book?
I believe they would. There's enough other elements. If you like a love story, that's in there. If you like a murder mystery, that's in there. So yes, I think so.
Okay, thank you. The next person we're going to hear from is my friend Jaren. Jaren has children. She has 3 precious little girls and a little boy. And I've often thought how good a job she and her husband are doing raising those children. So I have some questions about that for Jaren as she talks about where the Crawdads Sing. Maybe if you are a parent, you could relate to some of the things that Jaren is saying and thinking about whether your children could be raised in a marsh and survive like Kaya in the book. I'm here today to talk with my friend Jared Kramer, and Jaren is the mother of 3 precious little girls and a son. And I wanted her to talk to us a little bit about the parenting that we saw in Where the Crawdads Sings. And Jaren read the book some time ago, and I knew that she had read it, so I wanted to get her take on it, share that with you. Okay, Jaren, what do you think about the way Kaya's mother and father parented her?
Well, they clearly allowed her a lot of independence when they were in the home, because we see later in her, as she grows into an adolescent and adult, she's able to take care of herself in a way that I think that a lot of us couldn't even imagine if we'd been abandoned like that. We see some heartbreaking things in her home when she's really little, and a lot of it is just alluded to. We don't get to see a lot of it, but we know that she's had this father who has a history of alcoholism and abuse and just some, really painful things in her childhood. And her mother was there for a while. And then at the beginning of the book, of course, we see her abandoned by her mother. And we don't fully know the whole story. We don't really know why. We find out later what may have happened and why she chose to leave them. But we just see that heartbreak in the beginning, and all, as of course, as a little girl, she's trying to do is figure out why won't they stay? Why won't they take care of her? And she realizes very soon that she has to start taking care of herself, which is just so heartbreaking. I think as any parent, as anyone who has a small child or anybody who has a relationship with a small child, it's kind of hard to understand why her parents would do this, what maybe happened with their childhood that would lead them to do something like this. But, so a lot of questions, sometimes more questions than answers, when you read something like this, but it definitely plays into what she is able to do as an adult, I think.
What about her brothers and sisters?
Well, I think she had 6 brothers and sisters, maybe 5, I can't remember. And then one in particular that she was closest to, who was still quite a bit older than her. I think at the beginning of the book, we see her, she's about 6. And her youngest sibling is 7 years older than her. So on the verge of, I think, leaving the home as well, which we end up seeing him do. But I know they were very, very close and they had a strong bond and a relationship. So that also kind of played into these, this history of abandonment that she had. Her father didn't take very good care of her, and her mother obviously left the whole family. And she saw all of her siblings leave too, even the one that she was closest to. I think it was Jody was his name. And I know that we see him being very encouraging and very kind of fatherly to her at the beginning of the book, and teaching her some things and kind of encouraging her to embrace that independence and to kind of take care of herself, but also kind of strengthen her character a little bit. And I know that she talks about him throughout the book and her relationship with him, and how much she did love him and cared for him, and how she looked at him as just this kind of mentor figure in her life. And I think that's really something special to see. I think so often we put a lot of emphasis on our relationship with our parents, but your sibling relationships are so important and so valuable, and they really frame your character in all of us, I think.
Do you think any of your girls could have survived like Kaya did?
That's a really, really good question. And my gut instinct is to say no way, because it's just, what she did was incredible. And I think that just based on the circumstances that my children are being raised in, I haven't had to give them any of that independence. I've never really let them off the leash before. My husband and I have always been there to take care of them fully. And I don't see them ever really having that type of a childhood where it's necessary for them to do that. So we've really just, we've been enablers in that sense, that we've always basically done everything for them. I think that that's kind of a generational thing as well, because of course this story takes place 70 years ago. And I think, kids these days, they don't really have to do as much as maybe in past generations had to. And so, my initial instinct is to say, I don't think that any of my kids could do anything like this. But then at the same time, we all have that level of survival in us. And I think you do what you have to do. And I think that that's clearly what she did. She took the very few things that she had learned early on in her childhood to, raise herself, basically. And I think that those are things that she learned early on from her parents.
This is my friend Kim. Kim and I read a lot of the same things. And I knew she had read Where the Crawdads Sing. And so I had a few questions about the book for her. Kim, do you think this book is believable?
Unfortunately, I do. I have some friends with differing opinions, but sadly, I do think there are children, maybe not in the same circumstances on a marsh, in a swamp, but I do think there are cases of poverty and kids that are abandoned more than we realize out there. Maybe their parents are not completely out of the picture, but they're surviving on their own as much as possible. Maybe not to the exact, like I said, circumstances she was living off the land exactly, but there are a lot of kids that are surviving on their own day to day for their own resources.
It does seem like that the human spirit is very resourceful and can survive trauma.
Yes.
Unbelievably.
Yes. Unfortunately, I think I have a few friends that are involved with like foster care and the call here in Arkansas. And they've said, yes, actually, there are kids, maybe it hasn't, where they've grown up their whole lives on their own. They've usually, social services has been able to intervene and help them and get them placed in homes. But I do think that there are a lot of kids. There was something in Houston a couple months ago that there was a family of 3 kids. I think they were like 15 and two younger ones, and they were living on their own for several years while their parents were gone in an apartment. And their neighbors were bringing them food and helping them, but they didn't have electricity. And I do think that happens sad enough in our society.
Do you think a mother can abandon their child the way her mother abandoned her?
Right. So at the first of the book, I was like, how could she just walk away and leave her with the dad that was so abusive and so awful? Why didn't she take her with her or take the kids? And then I think it's explained later that she had some mental illness. And then when she came to, I guess she went off and lived in New Orleans with her sister. It comes to find out that they said, then she wanted them back after she got a little better. And that's why she had written the letter. And then the father wouldn't allow it. So I do think there'd have to be something, whether it's abuse, mental illness, or something to that mother instinct to completely abandon that child. So sadly.
Yeah. Well, it's not only that while she was a child, she was exceptional. The book follows her into adulthood, and some traumatic things happen to her as she's a young woman. And then later she becomes very accomplished. How do you think Kaya saw herself? Did she feel secure in doing all those things?
Right. I think at first, absolutely not. I wouldn't expect her to either. For everybody you love or had known to leave you, I don't think you'd have any self-worth. And then when she goes to school and the kids all make fun of her and people in town look down on her, and that's constantly, all she's known. She's never really known any love or nurturing, or even the human touch was so foreign to her that was so scared to her. But I think over time she saw, I think that's why she studied nature so much and had so much familiarity. I think she learned from nature how to be, where she talks about the fireflies and how the fireflies were signaling to one another, and that's how they would mate. But then sometimes they would send a separate signal to be able to capture and eat them. And I think that's, you see that later of her kind of making explanation for how her events have unfolded in her life. Well, not everything is beautiful and perfect in nature. It isn't always nicey nice and everything. I think that's how she kind of made sense of it. And then maybe that's why at the end she comes to terms with it. And this is how she kind of overcomes what's been done to her by taking matters in her own hands.
That sort of thing. And so for a child, once they grow up and process that, and how they're processing that internally, they're processing that as, one, my parents don't love me, don't like me, don't want me, because they're here, but there's no interaction as far as doing the things parents would do. So if you're with someone all the time and the emotional level is, this person doesn't want me, how damaging that would be. But oftentimes children that are abandoned, whether it is put into foster care, whether even just up and leaving, even here in town, there are students at our local schools whose parents have dropped them off at school and never came back. Here in our local community, that has happened. And those children, while it is very traumatic to have that happen, as they grow up and process that, the majority of them process that as, my parent wasn't able to take care of me. Not that they didn't want me, but there was something going on in their life that they just didn't know how, or they couldn't, or something was wrong with them instead of neglect, where something's wrong with me, that you're here with me, but you don't like me. And so as far as, they're both super traumatic. And of course, I'm not an expert on the topic, but it's one thing to have someone say to you verbally, non-verbally, I don't want you. It's another thing to have someone say, I can't take care of you right now.
And so in the story, you would put Kaya as someone who was abandoned, more so than neglected. She knew that a parent at one time had loved her and cared for her.
And she had some other, and she had some other familial and relationships in her community that instilled some of that, of normalcy of growing up with people who care about you. But you see her having the ability to care for herself. Because I think we were mentioning it earlier as we were talking that she was 8 around that when she was completely abandoned. And so we know from childhood development that basically at 8 years old, you're pretty much who you're going to be the rest of your life. And everything else after that is either tearing that down or building that up. And so from a personality capability, I mean, that's really the big thing. We talk a lot about personality, but capability is probably a bigger component of who we are as people. She had that already in who she was. And so now the next little bit of her life is living that out.
Well, when she moved from the protection of her family onto a wider social structure, the social worker tried to incorporate her, tried to involve her in school, we see no church affiliation in the family or in the community. It seems like that even the amount of business she had to do with the storekeepers or whoever, that seemed to be difficult for her to do.
So with cases of trauma where you're neglected, you're often going to try to make connections through initiating further conflict and trauma on other people. And so these are the situations where kids will often abuse their siblings or hurt kids at school. But in many cases of abandonment, loneliness and isolation becomes their security blanket. And so they are pushing away at every instance of connection because it is changing their normal, what's normal to them. So it's normal to be out in the woods. It's normal to kind of do my thing, to be in my mind, to write my poems. You often see that in adolescent, kids and preteens that they will often revert to, or not revert, but they'll go into that, let me just go in my room and read my book or play my game or do whatever. And they usually come out of that as they get older. But for children of abandonment, it's often, that's kind of, I met one little boy who was abandoned, and he became engrossed with history and mythology. And so his brothers and sisters.
That last person, we missed the introduction. That was Patrick Luce. Patrick Luce has a degree in psychology and has done a lot of family counseling, and that's the reason I asked him to focus on that aspect of the book. Now that you've heard a reaction of a lot of the readers, I'd like to share with you some of my impressions of the book and what I think about it. One of the persons that I interviewed that I didn't get to get on tape was a person named Kristen Deshawn, and she had a different take than a lot of others. She felt the book was completely unbelievable. She didn't believe that a young girl could grow up and not learn any social skills, not learn how to really take care of herself or to do her hair and shave under her arms or whatever, that she could become such a desirable mate for all these people. She thought that was unbelievable. She thought it was unbelievable that she could become not just a writer, but a great writer and sell thousands of books and knew nothing about publishing. She just found so much of it unbelievable that it distracted from her. Well, I'm in a little bit in agreement with Kristen, but I think if you read this book, you have to suspend your belief for the sake of story, sort of like you do in a fantasy story. You don't have to believe Tarzan of the Apes to be able to read Burroughs' great work and understand something. And if you suspend that belief if you can believe that apes can raise a human child, then buy into that, then all the else you can sort of follows. One of the things that I particularly liked about the book was Kea. Kea is a kind of a bird-like creature. In fact, in the first page, when it describes Kea, it describes her hair as being black and thick like a crow. I would never have thought to write a sentence like that, but she compares her to birds. Later, we'll find that Kea lives in a shack. In a lot of ways, that shack is like a nest. It has a lot of ways you can get in and out of the shack and people not see you, or you can take flight, you can get away quickly, as she had to do on more than one occasion. And that seemed like a nest. Another place in the book, we find that Kea cannot be attracted to make human connections, but Tate makes attracts her by leaving little feathers and little shells and things in nature. And we know that there are several species of birds where the male attracts the female by presenting them with little presents and gifts. And this seemed to be very wonderful to Kea. You know, one thing about a lot of literature that deals with animals is the notion of anthropomorphism. That is, we make an animal like Lassie or Black Beauty. They take on characteristics that make them seem human, and they make them know love and courage and all that sorts of things. But this book does not use anthropomorphism. It uses the opposite of that. It takes the characteristics of animals and creatures and makes humans behave like fireflies, or makes humans behave like a bird, or like a fish. And so that's kind of a role reversal that you see in a lot of other literature that deal with both people and animals. One of the other things that's so unbelievable about the book is that when Kea first learns to read, the first sentence she ever reads is the first sentence from Aldo Leopold's book, an almanac, and it's a very profound sentence. It says something like, there are some people who can not live with nature, and there are some people who cannot live without it. Count me among the latter. And not only does Kea learn to read that sentence, but she appreciated it as great literature with her first sentence. That's completely unbelievable to me. And although Leopold's book is great, I read it very much later in life, and since I've reread it several times. And it's a very worthy book, but I would never have recognized its greatness when I was in the first grade learning to read. There's another aspect of the book that is unbelievable to me, and it's sort of a key place in the book when Kea makes connection with Tate. One of the gifts that he leaves her to attract her attention and to get her to trust in him is he leaves the feather of a tropic bird. And this tropic bird is the bird that I want to talk about today as our bird in the book. This is a picture of a tropic bird. You can see that the tropic bird has a long tail. Actually, that tail is made up of only 2 or 3 feathers, and they're very long. I don't know of another bird that has a single feathered tail quite as long as that. Maybe a scissor-tail flycatcher or fork-tail flycatcher might. But it's a very noticeable attribute, field marking of the bird. And the bird there are several tropic birds, but the bird that's talked about in the book is this whitetail tropic bird. And here are two images of it. Whitetail tropic birds are birds that are normally found around the equator. And they're found on several continents in the United States. And but in the Georgia and Carolinas, they very rarely appear. And to think that a child who was only 8 or 9 years old could have seen such a rare and unusual vagrant bird in the Carolinas or Georgia and know what it is just completely unbelievable. I looked through eBird and found that the white-tailed tropic bird is a vagrant, and it's very seldom seen. In fact, during 30 years of recording bird observations, it was only seen 20 times in the state of Georgia. And all but one of those times, it was actually not seen on the mainland, but it was seen at sea. And there was only been one recording in 20 years of it being in Georgia, according to eBird. And that just makes the whole story that hinges around that tropic bird unbelievable. But they are vagrant birds. They're a bird that is not threatened or endangered. They're common in their native area, but it's unlikely that you'd see such a bird. But nevertheless, for the story, if you suspend that belief like I was talking about, it's a very striking bird, and it's a wonderful bird, and it's the bird that I will always remember when I think about this book. There are other kinds of tropic birds. There's a red-tailed tropic bird. This is a photograph I took in Hawaii of a tropic bird. Tropic birds like to be near the sea, and they nest on high mountainous crags and high up on the banks. And that's the reason you can find them in Hawaii. But as you know, there are no tall, steep, mountainous banks in Georgia next to the ocean that would attract tropic birds. Well, this is what we've done in the Book and the Bird series in the past. The first book that we did was Audubon's book, Birds of North America. Now, all of these are still on the library's Facebook and YouTube, and you can go back and watch any of them. We've done a picture book, we've done sacred literature and looked at the Bible, we've done nonfiction and looked about the ivory-billed woodpecker. Last time we talked about a journal and we looked at the book A Big Year, and today, of course, we've done a work of fiction and we've looked at a novel. And I would encourage you to go back and look at those if you missed any of those in the series. But next we're going to do a book of poetry, and this is the book that we're going to do. The title of it is And Nobody Sees Them But Me, Poems of Hunting, Nature, Aldo Leopold, and Extinction. It's written by a man who's become a friend of mine recently, and Dean has also a wood carver, and we're to air that program in February. And at that time, when we do the program, we're going to unveil an original wood carving of an extinct bird by the poet in this book. And I wonder if you can guess what kind of bird that might be. And if you can come to the library several of his other carvings of extinct birds are displayed here, and you can see them in life size and color. And so tune in the next time and see which bird Dean Harleman will be displaying for us as we talk about Nobody Sees Them But Me, his book. And I might suggest to you, if you're looking for a Christmas gift for someone who's a duck hunter, or someone who's a poet, or for someone who is a birder, you might go to Amazon and look up his book and give them that book of poems. The Garland County Library and the Audubon Society till we'll meet again to talk about books and birds. I'm your host, Jerry Butler. Good reading. Paul, that's about it.
Yeah, we had Linda in the comments say, I love this book. We'll reread it again after watching the program.
Good. Okay.
I have a question for you, Jim. What made you choose the tropic bird with Arkansas not being close to the coast?
Well, it isn't an Arkansas bird, and I've never seen one in Arkansas. I don't think anybody ever has. It's almost as unlikely to see them here as it would be in Georgia. But I just took it because it was sort of central. It was the one feather that so amazed her and so captured her attention. And it sort of made the way for her to meet Tate. And Tate, more than anybody else, helped her to become a woman, I think.
Well, thank you once again for a great program. And again, like Jerry said, tune in for his next episode in February of next year. But we'll actually have another program with Mr. Butler here in just a couple weeks, in collaboration with the Garland County Master Gardeners on Wednesday the 15th. How about you tell them about that one?
Well, in that program, we're going to be talking about the Christmas bird count. The Christmas bird count is kind of the front door for birders to become really involved in birding. And we'll be talking about the Christmas bird count. I'm not in charge of the Christmas bird count, but I participate, and we'll be talking about what it is and how you can become involved. And in that program also, we're going to be talking about birds in winter. You know, last winter we had a terrible snowstorm. Well, I wouldn't say terrible. We had a heavy snowstorm, and a lot of birds were strongly impacted negatively by that storm. So I'm going to talk a little bit about winter and birds and what you can do to protect birds in cold times.
Thank you very much. So we'll see you again in a couple weeks. And until then,
peace and birds.